we'll get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Adam Davis, one of the directors of product here at Productboard, and also our product makers community lead. And I'm very excited to have Cei Sanderson with us today. So Cei, thank you very much for being with us. For those that don't know, Cei is director of product at Bango, a company which has, this is super interesting actually, I was doing some research on what Bango does, but they develop some unique purchase behavior technology that enables millions more users to buy products and services they want from different companies using really innovative methods of payment, including carrier building, digital wallets, and subscription bundling as well. Cei's also has quite a deep focus on creating enterprise products in the energy and financial services, and he's helped lots of different startups and small to medium enterprises build product organization with experience of more than a decade building products himself. So super excited about having him here today. And for folks that are tuning in, Cei will be talking to us about how to unlock innovation with your team by empowering your team with strategic context. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Cei. And yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to share my screen and we're get going. So as Adam mentioned, with the decade or so of product management expertise, I want to talk to a sort of topic that's really sort of close to my heart, which is sort of building those products, but building it with engineers to make those products that customers love. So I really wanted to thank, as a starting point, it's been a while since I've presented publicly, and it was actually the product folks on X or on Twitter that got me on sort of Productboard's radar, and awesome. for Scott who encouraged me to actually pick up and start talking again about what I love. So without further ado, and I start with a product manager, tech lead and a designer go into planning, and they probably want to go into a bar after this meeting. And the product manager says, you heard it at the company meeting, the VP of sales wants us to focus on the big whale accounts. This is where the revenue is, and so we're going to switch and we're going to be adding some features to win there. So even after pre-planning, now there's no clear goal. So what does it leave with the team? Because currently they've got these initiatives that they're working on to make deployments and get customers onboarded, self-serve. But the CTO has been very, very clear they're still going to work on these sort of things. So we're left with a product team that's adding features to go after tier one big whale customers and reducing onboarding time to scale that volume. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a familiar topic for many of you. For me, having worked in the B2B enterprise space, it's a topic that comes up again and again and again when I talk to product managers. So my name's Cei, at Cei Sanderson on X, and as Adam says, I work for a company called Bango currently. I'm a long-suffering business analyst turned into product manager, and now sort of working towards product leadership, where I'm helping my teams scale and grow. And as Adam introduced Bango a little bit, the best story I always talk about when Bango is how you can, you know that Bango's been involved in it when you're buying a mobile phone and they're probably giving you a video subscription service of some sort for 12 months. The power, the engine that sits behind that subscription is Bango. So we are the technology behind that payment choice that you're making. Now, if we come back to my life as a business analyst and a product manager, I was working at General Electric earlier in my career, and I worked on an energy product that had more than 1,000 customers in an enterprise B2B space in the energy industry. And it's not possible. I worked out very, very quickly to do everything that those customers were asking, right? So this is what really attracted me to product management, and was that need to have some context to make some decisions. Not to say, should we listen to this customer or should we listen to this customer, but actually, how can I make decisions that help the customer base in aggregate form build the products that we love, and that they love, and that they buy and they come back to again and again and again. Not just the one that shouts loudest, shouts last. So this is what I've come to sort of call strategic context. And I found that with it, engineers have the space to use the best technology to solve the problems that need solving. So coming back to our story, and the result of it is generally frustration. So the product manager, frustrated. How can you create a valuable and viable product for your customers when that customer type is vastly different? It feels like you're doing things at other ends of the spectrum. Your designers are equally frustrated. Who is that user that I'm designing for, building these products for? And your engineers, in all likelihood, building features quickly in this way, in this sort of dipole of customer bases, they're quite likely under pressure, but bored technically and just not challenged. So what we end up with is a company as a whole that is frustrated. Everything is too slow, revenue is too slow coming in. And it's really understandable that everybody's frustrated, because that lack of strategic context for the teams and the apparent lack of strategy impacts the solutions that those product teams are building, the employee motivation, revenue, and of course it impacts the customers at the end of the day. So being a business analyst, I'm just going to take a quick step back and talk about definitions, because when we start talking about strategy and strategic context, and we'll no doubt talk about vision a little bit here as well, is that these items are not necessarily best understood by everybody. Certainly when you're talking to your product teams or talking across the business about these things, these aren't necessarily really clear. So getting across those terms is really, really crucial. So first off, we're going to introduce Jane. So Jane is this technical lead. And when I talk about a technical lead, I'm talking about a software engineer, really senior software engineer that's probably mentoring, definitely involved in the product discovery end of it, end of the product life cycle, and they don't generally line manage. So I'm not going to cover Jane as a line manager if they do line manage, but it's more her expertise in the industry and with the technologies that I'm talking about. And she's part of a cross-functional team, which is what I would call a product team that is building those products for the customers. So if we now talk about the product vision, as I mentioned, product vision and product strategy being really, really clear. A red flag that I often hear is we need vision and strategy. Well, which one is it that you need? Do you need both? Do you need one or the other? So actually the other day I was talking to someone, and they were describing how the thing that they really needed was a strategy. They said, I really need the strategy. I'm just unclear at the moment on what the strategy is here. And like any good product manager, I sort of dug in and tried to really understand what they were trying to go for. And he was like, I understand what the challenges are at the moment that we've got, and the approach that we're taking and all that kind of stuff makes sense. But what I don't understand is what's that 3 to 5 year picture of where this is going to be. And so through that conversation and learning it, it's like, actually, that's the vision that you need. So the vision is that 3 to 5, maybe 10 years, depending on your industry, description of your product. It's very likely a visual description. You should be able to see it in your mind, even if it's a text-based vision, of what the life looks like for your customers and users. And that's the piece that's really, really important. And we often hear about vision statements and the sort of 6 lines of how you write a vision statement. And I always ask myself and ask the people that have written them is, does that inspire your team? Does that really motivate them? Does that give them a picture in their mind of what the world looks like in those 3 to 5 years? If the answer is no, another format may be needed. So that's the product vision. And then we talk about strategy. And so when I talk about strategy, one of my favorite books is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. So this is very, very much taken from that. And if we think about that product vision, what are the challenges that are stopping us from getting to that vision? But there are always so many challenges. So which ones are the ones we need to focus on? And how as a business are we going to overcome them? So the terms that I use when I'm always talking about in strategy is strategic context and strategic objectives. So context is that what's the information that the person I'm talking to right now needs to help them make a decision and move things forward for the product and for the company. A product strategy could well be a document of 10, 15 pages long. They don't need all of that to help them make the decision right now. So what is that piece of context that they need to move forward? And then the objectives is because, like any good understanding, is how do we know when that challenge is overcome, that we need to move on to the next challenge. So when I talk about strategic objectives, that's what I'm talking about. So finally, the other words that we often hear when talking about product strategy and product vision is, where's your roadmap? So I'll be clear, when I talk about product roadmap, I'm talking about an artifact or a deliverable from the strategy. The roadmap isn't the whole strategy. You certainly can't work out everything, the strategy of a company from its roadmap. However, you can, to a certain extent, reverse engineer a good deal of the strategy from their roadmap. And actually, it's a really good takeaway from today is, if you feel that the strategy maybe is a bit unclear, is go and have a look at the roadmap. See what it looks like and see what it's saying, because it should help you understand what the challenges your customers are having. And your challenges, if it's an internal roadmap, the challenges that you're having internally as well. So you should be able to piece that together as a product manager and understand at least a good deal of the strategy from it. The other term that's often used in this context is what I describe as a delivery plan. So when we talk about a roadmap, especially in B2B enterprise deals, it's, so where's the dates on that roadmap? When am I going to get this thing that's slated for later or next or whenever it is? So where I try and where I will talk about a product delivery plan, a product delivery plan is one of those items on that roadmap. What does it look like and when is it going to appear? So in that way, even if those dates appear on the roadmap, it comes from the delivery plan. And that way you're helping to distinguish between what is the roadmap and what is the delivery plan. So if we come back to our product team and just remind ourselves that they've been asked to add a load of features for the big whale customers, the tier 1 customers, and they've been asked to reduce onboarding time so that they can scale customer onboard volume. And as we talked about, they're fairly frustrated. So the real likelihood, they go back to their desks, pick up the next stories on that backlog and begin work on it. Now, in our story, we're talking about engineers and really empowering and unleashing those engineers on the problems we talk about. So as a good tech lead, James keeps up with the industry. And that's not just understanding all the latest technologies, but probably understanding how tech leads in other companies are operating. And when you're faced with frustrations and challenges that we've just described, often the biggest question is, well, how do those product companies that are talked about so much, how do they work? What do they do differently? As you saw from the thing that was described before, and the two things that she's been asked to focus on, they've got product teams. They're working as a product team. They've gone to a certain extent to outcomes and not features. So they're talking about reducing onboarding time. So what do those companies that have that isn't going on here? So of the engineers in the room, or the product teams, product managers with product teams in the room, it'd be really interesting to understand how many people have experimented with the latest technologies to keep themselves up to date. Maybe that's large language models and AI, maybe that's artificial reality, whatever it is. But it's interesting to understand how much your team is keeping up to date with technology by understanding all these trends that are coming up, how much you're keeping up to date. And so for those of you that have experimented, how many did this as part of your job? And how many of you did it because you're actually really interested in technology and so you go home and do it? And that's a really good indicator of where technology plays a part in your culture of your company. So Jane's looking at all these products surrounding her that engineers really built, engineers came up with before they became hugely successful businesses. So the Nest thermostat was developed in part by engineers, understanding where technology was going and putting it in an industry that's really needed disrupting. Roblox, username David Baszucki, the founder, is also known as Builderman. He's an engineer and an entrepreneur. We talk about YouTube on her screen there. So you're using YouTube all the time. Again, an engineer came up with this. I had a quick look when researching for this, and me at the zoo, I'd never seen it before until I was researching for this. It's now been, it was the first video uploaded and now it's been seen 276 million times. And it says, this is me at the zoo and there's some elephants behind me. And that's basically it. But it's still been seen that many times. Actually, before Bango, I worked at a company that dealt with real-time financial crime. And by real time, I'm talking about millisecond risk analysis of a payment transaction. So this technology, the product itself, it came out of Cambridge University, but it's put together by engineers and by data scientists. So it happens, it does happen. These companies come up and it's engineers that are often the ones coming up with the ideas of how technology is changing and evolving to solve problems that exist in new ways. But it doesn't just happen in startups. This isn't you've got to go to work at startups if you want to be empowered as an engineer to go and build some things. There are plenty of examples like the Alexa's devices, like Disney's Magic Bands. And if you go and have a look at everything that Google does, there are lots and lots of things they've tried to do and then potentially killed as well. Killed by Google.com is one of my favorite things to go and have a look at all the different things they've tried, failed, and finished off. So it's not as easy in huge enterprises and enterprise B2B software, but it is definitely still possible to allow your engineers to get to a stage where they can solve problems with emerging technologies. But Jane here, the most common thing I hear, well, actually there's two common things that I hear when we get to this point. It's, we have no strategy. So we've just gone into the room for planning and we've just been told that we're now going to go focus on the big whales. We were focusing on small onboarding. The obvious conclusion is we have no strategy, or the strategy keeps changing. It won't work here. X customer just shouts loud and we just follow that path. It's very hard to sort of get out of that momentum as a product team where you don't necessarily see the whole strategy. You don't necessarily have the context. So you go back to the backlog, pick up the next item, and wondering why things are so different in other companies than it is from here. So something needs to change. And in my story here, luckily for Jane and her product team, that happens next week when a new employee joins, the product leader. Now, the product leader doesn't have to have the title of director of product or head of product or chief product officer. It could be anyone in the company that is responsible for providing the strategy and the strategic context for their teams to go and make these decisions, so that it doesn't look like there's no strategy. It's clear that when actually that change in decision happens, it's an intentional decision. So the product leader's responsibility is to provide that clarity. And that's what I call strategic context. It's the elements of the product strategy that the product teams need at that time. It might be that the ICP changes or is the same, but it's a bit bigger and wider ideal customer profile. Is it the big whales? Is it the small fish? Is it all banks? That clarity, that context is what's needed for these teams. So when I think about, we come back to product strategy and we'll work into examples of strategic context. So given that there's no one way to provide it, right, because it's a subset of the product strategy, you can provide it in many different ways. It's really important to understand just some things about strategy that are good and bad. And so when I talk about that strategy and we go back to defining it, we talk about how we're going to reach that product vision, the challenges there are, any understanding constraints of them, and how you're going to approach to go ahead and take them. So if we look at a couple of examples, I've heard before, and I've been in companies before, where the strategy is cloud. Now, is that good strategy? Is that good strategic context? Probably not, but if you think about it, does it describe the challenge? No, it probably implies that there is a challenge with existing infrastructure. But it is a guiding policy or a constraint. We are going to use the cloud for our products to help us. But as I say, the challenge itself and the approach beyond it will be cloud is kind of left to the imagination of the product teams. Another one I've seen a few times is copy the competitor or match the competitor's features. Good strategy, good strategic context? Again, probably not. It implies the challenges. Maybe it's because we're losing deals to the competition. Maybe it's because the marketing of the competitor is just a list of things that you don't have. It has a guiding policy of copy, but is copy a good strategy? Quite often, if you're trying to dominate the market, you're trying to win in the market, copying and chasing someone else is not necessarily the best strategy, but it is a strategy. The revenue-based or metric-based strategy, 30% market share by 2025. How about this? So of the three so far that we've talked through, I actually think this one may even be the weakest. It's measurable, so it has that strategic objective, but what's the challenge? What's the problem that they're trying to get past? And what are the constraints of it? What's the approach? This is the goal, maybe, but it isn't the strategy. If you take a minute to think about it, how would a team make any decisions based on this context? So if we come back to starting to talk about our similar situation to where Jane and her product team are left, this is one of the examples that we start to just build a little bit more context in. So the tier 1 bank segment has a total addressable market of 20 times the tier 2 and tier 3 combined. But tier 1 banks really need a tailored solution for what we're going to look to provide. And as they're more slow moving and they're going to need more features, we're going to look to set up a delivery team to be able to cope with that tailored solution. We're going to ramp up our operations team because banks are going to need 24/7 support for this. And we're going to build an integration to support all of the different potential integrations around customer communications that tier 1 bank has. So how's this? It might be a little better. It talks about the shifting market segment and the challenges in doing that. It talks about the needs of that segment versus our current solution a little bit. And it's got a sort of guiding principle that actually the way we're going to do this is as a business as a whole, we're going to shift. We're going to spin up these teams, increase the support levels. And we have an understanding of banks' existing infrastructure, so we understand how we're plugging into that system. And the final example is, I suppose, roughly based on reality. The online grocery market is a 100 billion high growth industry, but Amazon doesn't have the resources and store infrastructure needed to offer the customer value. So we're going to look at a likely acquisition of an upmarket vendor in this space because we really want to avoid a price war with other online grocery options and create a race to the bottom. So we're going to create value in a way, but we still want a piece of this market. Again, it's got an indication of the challenges of moving into a different market and an indication that they want to move into a different market. It's got an indication of the challenges that we want to do and a guiding policy of these are the things we're missing and this is how we're going to go about it. So there's some really interesting things when you start digging into these shorter text-based contexts that we provide. We can start making decisions, but we need a level of information in order to start making those decisions. So I'm not going to dig into the common frameworks that I've seen and used when it comes to providing strategic context and building into the strategy, but I'd encourage you to look up and maybe consider using these to help you build, test and refine that strategy. So the ones that I've got listed here, we talk about BCG's growth share metrics. We talk about McKinsey's 3 horizon framework. The Strategizer series includes the business model canvas. Melissa Perry's product strategy canvas is another one. And even a SWOT analysis plus a little bit of sort of illustrative language is going to help you give some context. It can give you which are the strengths that we're going to double down on, the opportunities to seize, the weaknesses to protect, and so on. I've put OKRs on there. Please at me on this one. OKRs don't replace your strategy. They aren't the strategy, but they might provide the teams with enough context to understand the decisions they need making. They provide focus, which is at the end of the day, that context is here. Focus on this, go solve the problems in this space. A personal favorite of mine to use when communicating strategic context is Gibson Biddle's GEM model, combined with either the other models that he proposes or one of the other models below. But very, very quickly, I can give context to teams about where we are in the product life cycle. Are we in a growth stage and therefore focusing on growth? Are we engaging customers and trying to focus on engagement? Are we monetizing those existing customers? So am I looking at things like strategic objectives around number of customers or daily active users? Am I looking at metrics around retention or churn? Or am I looking at metrics around lifetime value and improving that? Very quickly, with one word, I can give a lot of context for the teams to make sure that they're getting as much out of the decisions that they need to do. So in our story, the product leader is brand new to this job, maybe even brand new to this domain. So how can they help straight away? And really, surely this is an impossible task to do straight away. And it is impossible to come up with a full scale product strategy that's tested, validated, and everything in a very, very short time without your teams going, hey, product leader, what's the product strategy? What do we need to do? However, some context setting to help focus can be done really, really quickly. One of the things that I often talk to product leaders, the first thing you do when you join a new place is pull together a wild ass guess of what the product strategy is, mostly by talking to all the different people in the company that you need to talk to in the first 30 days anyway, and say, here are the things that they're working on. Here are the things that they're talking about in terms of the challenges with the current product, the challenges in the market. Here's a great start. So having that down on paper, if it doesn't exist already on the paper, starts to already rapidly give some context to the decisions that they're making. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do out of today is if you go and have a look, and if you feel that that strategy is lacking and that context for your teams is lacking, is go and have a look and write down all the different initiatives or projects that your team is working on or is affected by. If possible, group them into some level of themes and play that back to the leaders in your company. So in this case, you're really managing up, you're taking ownership of your product and how it fits with the product strategy. Challenge that strategy and ask what and how questions to the ones that don't fit. This is something you can take into your daily work from tomorrow and just start managing up, showing an interest to those product leaders that you're thinking about product strategy and that you need strategic context in order to do your job effectively. So Jane and the product team have worked through this strategic context. They now think they can make the best decisions and the best bets for their customer. The team are pumped. They see the value in the product strategy and the context it provides. And this is what the textbook says and where the textbook generally stops. But building real products, particularly enterprise B2B products with very big customers, not so many customers, and very demanding customers. And if you try to just apply the textbook, I've found that quickly the teams will burn themselves out and they've lost this really, really critical transformation opportunity for the company because this isn't the textbook world. Reality can hit when we're too dogmatic about what the textbooks say. So there's 4 main challenges that I see product teams encounter when they see the textbook and try to apply the textbook. Number 1, the feature request. So if you Google feature request template, there are hundreds and thousands of responses that you'll receive that'll say, this is a template for building a feature request. This is a workflow for feature requests. It usually ends up with some sort of spreadsheet or tool with a set of prioritization factors that you sort. The top one comes out, you add it to your backlog, and you keep going. And if you allow all feature requests to be treated like that, that becomes your product strategy. Doesn't matter what's written, what context you're given. Here are those growing list of things that we're just going to build because the customer's asked for it, and there's a waiting, which usually, is it a big customer? Have they asked about it lots of times? What's their priority? We'll push it to the top. So how do we deal with that one? The next one I see is the office animals. Most commonly the hippo. I have seen a lot on social media recently of the different animals of the office. It's probably doing the rounds on LinkedIn or X or wherever about those different animals. But the hippo is the one that most affects product teams in this respect. And I once worked in a company where the director of engineering wrote a 6-page document in his own time that stated, we're going to become the marketplace for engineers. So from a migration of a legacy product to a new technology, cloud, and I've been through quite a few of those migrations in my career, that director had an idea. It was actually a really interesting idea, but rather than dealing with customers, he was proposing we should deal with those end users. In this market, those end users were often contractors to the companies that we were selling to. So why don't we let the users sell themselves and their skills to the customers in a tailored job market sort of way? It's actually a really interesting sort of idea that he'd come up with and written down. It's thought-provoking, certainly. It still has me thinking about it, and it's quite inspiring. But what is a product team going to do with this when that gets dropped on them? It's a new customer profile. It's a new value proposition. Actually, it's probably a whole new product that the company doesn't do anything to do with, but it uses some of the underlying technology that the director of engineering knew. This is a huge challenge to you trying to apply your strategic context. The other one is that everything's allowed to change. So we talk about agile and we talk about methodologies where change is expected, but then I often see the inverse applied to strategy. Strategy doesn't change, and it always surprises me when I hear that, what is the strategy? Oh, the strategy is fixed for X period of time. So if we go back to our definition, and strategy is about the challenges you've identified, and you've identified them as the most important ones to get you towards the vision, those challenges must and can and do change. So the same way that product teams should be experimenting with their product solutions and discovering the best solution to the problem and constantly optimizing, product leaders should be doing the same with the strategy. In a product team, you should be challenging because you are talking to the customers regularly. You're seeing what's happening, and the results of your experiments should be challenging in trying to invalidate the product strategy that you're on. And the final one that we see, I see quite often in social media, is just say no. Just apply the textbook and say no to everything. Say no to that feature request. Say no to that hippo. Just assume the strategy is fixed and just go ahead. And anyone who knows enterprise B2B or even any product in any area knows that you can't say no to anything not on the roadmap. As Rich Mironov puts it, there's only one route this goes, which is the button that says escalate to CEO, and it's coming quickly back at you. So there's one big final challenge, which is a kind of tailored version of the feature request, which is the sales special. So imagine yourself in a product team in an enterprise software company, and all of a sudden you get an urgent Slack about a deal in the pipeline. The product team needs to implement these must-win features to close this prospect. Big bank's about to sign a 5-year, $10 million deal if we can just add these features to the product. The immediate response might be, well, we can't commit right now. After all, we're not in the custom business, software business. We've already committed to these, and this is our strategy. We believe that it happens to helps all these companies, not just this one. But here's $10 million on the line of a deal that probably means a lot to the salesperson, the pre-sales person. It's ready to close. This feature, it's on our roadmap. It says it there later in the roadmap. What's the problem? They're escalating this. and it's in the CEO's ear within an hour. So now what? If you give in and do the special, you'll help that short-term revenue. Salesperson, that's great. Product manager, all I have to do is give them a call and it's done. I'm running the roadmap. So you make the product potentially worse, harder to maintain. It may be useful for the customer, all of your customers in aggregate, but it's that far out on the roadmap that you're not quite sure yet. You've not validated that problem. If you don't do it, if you say no, that's also going to hurt. Product might be seen as not valuing the contribution or the concerns of other functions. And a product manager that generally gets in the way of the salesperson, that's got the CEO's ear, collaboration's coming to a halt. You're not going to get access to those customers and those prospects that you need to understand the market so much. And this is just going to keep happening anyway, let alone that escalate to CEO bottom. So yes, the dreaded sales special cannot be processed away. They can't be ignored, and they need to be balanced in your system. Actually, think about it a different way. Don't try and process it out. Make it part of your understanding. There's a balance to come through in your system, which is how do we make sure that we understand the market well enough to know that Big Bank, who is in our core ICP, is going to have these sort of requests. They're going to have the thing that's needed to close the deal. Even in a fantastic sales team where they sell the problem, when you start talking about B2B enterprises at this size, it's always going to be a level of uniqueness. It needs to be in your strategic context. It's that understanding that this is going to happen when you're working through as a product team. So innovation and empowerment are just phrases that I see get used a lot. And I started looking at my title and my description today, and there's empowerment, there's innovation written in it. And they are, I suppose, one of the tech buzzwords that I see frequently. So if I think about it a different way, essentially, it's about giving a strategic context, but applying that real world to the textbook. So having that strategic context will kill some initiatives. There may be some of those sales specials that go away, some of those hippo conversations in the kitchen that go away, but it will create space. As soon as you're able to use that context to help you make decisions, you already have the understanding of the users, the understanding of the technology much better than those around you, much better than your customers, much better than the sales teams. And now you understand the strategic context of the company to help you make those decisions. So really what it is, it's about that space that you have, that space and how you use it. It is really hard work, right? Now you've got that space, you've got to learn to leverage, sit on it, do something with it. It's easier in the short term, perhaps, to just do that next sales request, that sales special, that feature request. But it's also what you'll find is the most rewarding thing for your teams and for your engineers. And this is the space where we talk about discovery and continuous discovery. But that's a topic for lots of other people and lots of other times to come on that I'm not going to take on today. So if you take one thing away from today, it's to challenge your product leaders, the directors of product like me, the CTO, the CMO, whoever it is that's giving you that context, that's giving you that strategy, and say to them, help me understand. How are we approaching this? So work upwards from the roadmap to articulate that back and play that back. Work upwards from ongoing projects to articulate the strategy and really manage up, right? There's nothing better than I like to see than product managers who are taking an interest in this level of conversation and coming to me and challenging that strategy. They're the product managers that are starting to really turn themselves into product leaders. So I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about one of my favorite topics. And now, Adam, we're over to any questions.
Awesome, Kai. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. really enjoyed that. And I think I resonated a lot with some of those challenges and some of those tactics that you mentioned as I kind of progressed in my career. So yeah, thank you very much. We do have a number of questions, so I think we'll dive into those, and we've got about 10 to 15 minutes or so. There's been a little bit of a theme in terms of managing up and how product managers, perhaps earlier in their career, or perhaps they don't have the confidence, or they might be in a new organization, like how do they actually do that? So you mentioned a really good tactic, which I wrote down straight away. I think it's a really good piece of advice in terms of writing down all the different projects and initiatives that you're working on to try and help kind of group and theme them together to, I guess, ultimately highlight there might be a bit of disparity in terms of what you're focusing on, or a lack of clarity. And I guess besides from kind of highlighting that to a leader, because you could show it to them and they just don't care, like what are some other tactics that you think folks could follow to either build that trust up, build that relationship, start to influence? Like what else can people be thinking about?
So I always see that when you feel that you don't have this strategic context or this strategy, it almost ends up being a negotiation with whoever's in the business leading from this. And there may be no one. You're new to the company. You said possibly that you don't know who to go to, even if there is someone who owns this. So it's really, in your example, you're young, you're new. You still need to build that network up, because knowing that network, again, there's two things that I look for in product managers. One is, how are you talking across the business? Because a product is not just your engineers, it's everybody in the company that's building this product. So I find that if you're generally interested, people like to talk about the challenges they have. You may end up with a lot of internal challenges, but you're going to see them. And then from what can you do once you understand those challenges? Well, yes, you can play back to the product leaders, to people that may not hear it back. But what you can do then is start framing the things that you're working on the challenges you've heard. Mm-hmm. So if you can say, hey, look, we're working on this, and rather than just saying it's this feature, you can say, hey, I spoke to XYZ and they have said that this is one of their challenges. And actually, this thing that we're doing is going to help with that challenge that I've heard all about, whether it's an internal one or a customer interview you've done. Just immediately adding that level of understanding and knowledge, again, will make people that not interested, don't want to hear it, suddenly just sort of, okay, this person's really speaking something that I can think they're asking the right questions and they're challenging me in the right way, as opposed to, we have no strategy, give me a strategy now or I can't do my job, which is sometimes what you get from product managers.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great advice. I'll jump into another question here, and then this one was from Sabrina, and there's kind of two parts to it, and it kind of ties into one of the questions that we got on LinkedIn as well. So you mentioned a few good frameworks to get started with creating a strategy. What should ICPMs who might not have the strategic context set do? Sorry, let me just look at this again. All right, so the gist of the question is, so you mentioned a few good frameworks that you spoke through. What should a person who doesn't have the strategic context from their leader do, and how could they create their own kind of product strategy? Like, what would be your recommendations to someone that doesn't have that strategic context set? So I think you covered it a little bit, but any, I guess, advice on that?
So I always find this comes down a little bit to, it will be a little bit with your manager as well, particularly a person starting out. If you're having one-to-ones with your manager, it's something you can have as a discussion in there. If you're not using one-to-ones effectively, is a huge thing as a product manager. Not using it as a status update, I'm going to play back everything I do. Actually do all that before the one-to-one, and then use the one-to-one for those conversations. So you can show, again, you're demonstrating that you're thinking about it, but asking them in that forum where you've got them for 30 minutes or an hour to ask them to talk you through the strategy. And you don't have to use the word strategy. Strategy is one of those kind of potentially fight or flight mechanisms, right? That gets people a little bit tense. You can talk about, that's why I love describing it like a challenge or an opportunity or a hurdle or whatever you want to use like that, because you can use that language, which is not anxiety inducing for a product leader, and they will talk through, hey, oh, I spoke to so and so and he was talking about this challenge and this challenge and this challenge, and you're starting to hear snippets of the challenges that they're aware of and therefore they're baking into the strategy, whether it's written down on paper or it's, you know, walking into a room and saying we're going for the big whales and that sort of stuff. Obviously it's not ideal if they're running in and just telling everyone to stop and change, but at least you're then starting to learn how their brain's ticking, what they're aware of and what they're using to factor into those decisions. That would be where
Okay.
in terms of frameworks, there's the ones I suggested, and I guess we can list those out afterwards in the comments on the LinkedIn.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And I think that'd be a good place to go. But yeah, I
Yeah,
would
brilliant.
recommend to anyone reading Gibson Biddle's. I think he's got a 12-part medium series on product strategy, which is fantastic reading.
Yeah, awesome. And I just put a link into our community, product makers community by Productboard. So we talk about these topics as well. So we'll pull this through. We got time for a few more questions. This is another one from Sabrina, kind of building on the types of tools that you use in your toolkit. And her question was around what time frame would you consider to be reasonable for a roadmap in an agile work environment? And a little bit more context for folks here. So creating roadmaps that reach too far into the future can be a struggle, since topics tend to change quite often in an agile work environment. I think this is the age-old question, that tension. What would be your thoughts in terms of how you would approach that, or how you think about how far you should be building out a roadmap?
So I always think it sort of becomes immaterial as to whether you're agile or not. It's more about your customer and the market that you're into. So it's going to differ based on their attitude towards things. So if you're in a really, truly huge enterprise software domain, they set their budgets probably about now for 2024. So if you're not in their budget cycle for now, and they're thinking about 2024, so that a project in 2024 where they can spend that money, your roadmap is going to be about 15 months, maybe a little bit longer. So we're talking 18 months. I think anything beyond that is probably a lot of guesswork. My personal preference is that strategy is not time bound in that respect, and roadmaps are not time bound. So you're thinking about the outcome that you're trying to achieve, the challenge you're trying to achieve. We need to achieve and overcome that challenge, whether it takes us 6 months, 18 months, or 1 week. This is the biggest challenge presenting to the business to achieve our vision. We've got to overcome it. So that next challenge, and the one that's in later or beyond or horizon, what you want to call it, you get to when you've achieved those challenges beforehand. So you could see a very quick moving item on the roadmap, but you might have at the same time your strategy, which is on an internal roadmap. You've got a legacy replatforming piece of work, which takes 18 months, 2 years. And many people have written about how hard these things are. So that item's going to stay in now for that length of time. So if you take away the thinking of it being time bound, then actually it becomes a lot more flexible and a lot more agile itself as a roadmap artifact.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the point you mentioned at the beginning about the customer, who's going to be looking at it, what information you're trying to convey, that's super important. Perhaps this might lead a little bit in terms of product strategy, but we've got a question from Mark here, and not to put you on the spot, but he's interested about, our audience loves specific working examples. They love it. And they're wondering if you could share an example from your experience where you overcame pushback from a senior leadership on an idea from you or your product management team, and I guess how you handled that. And if you can't think of a specific example, maybe more a little bit about how you might navigate something like that.
So the question is more a specific idea as a product manager or as a product leader describing strategy to my product teams? Just to make sure I'm the right example here.
Yeah, no. So the question was more around you as a product leader being able to push back to senior leadership on a specific idea.
So that is a good one, and it actually comes up quite a lot. So what you tend to see is that the senior leadership or whoever's pushing back on the idea has already thought about what solution to the problem that you're proposing. So if you go to this outcome side and you give this strategic context, hey, I need you to solve this problem, they've probably got an idea in their mind how you should solve that problem. And you then go, actually, we're going to solve it in a completely different way. What you tend to find is that hippos and senior leaderships don't necessarily allow you to just say no. Again, it's back to the just say no. You burn a lot of political capital in saying no at any time. So you always have to be care of it. So an example I had was actually me as a product manager, and then there was working with the product leader to do this. This is the best example I can think of. Was when I had in a previous company was thinking about how we could, this was back to the days of fraud and working in financial crime, of, well, actually the biggest problem that the customers were facing was deployment time. And so we were talking about rapid. This is one of my examples from earlier, that we've got to go and go and get as many as we can. But actually when interviewing customers and really understanding customers, their concern was not so much about the analytics, not so much about how long it takes to deploy, but what it was the cost of the operations team that was building and handling these alerts that was coming out. So they always talk about a balance between, you can find every item of fraud, but the bank's probably not got a fraud team to go and investigate every single one of them. And if you've got a piece of fraud that's $30 and you've got a fraud management team that is, costs more than $30 for the time they will work on it, then is it worth investigating? So I was trying to sort of propose that actually we solve the problem by going towards these fraud analysts and helping them, as opposed to the analytics was fantastic. It was outperforming. It was the differentiator. It didn't need massive. It needed to keep ahead and be our differentiator. But here was this problem on the side, and obviously it's very easy to get lost with no. We are the analytics. We are this. So what I ended up doing was putting together a business case, right? With product managers, put together a business case. Now, I'm not such a big fan of revenue business cases, because what you end up tending to do is roll up the money, saying, hey, we'll save 15 minutes per person. The average team size is 200, so 15 minutes per hour per person, 200. It's worth 3 billion a year, right? When you roll up the revenue numbers, because they're based on so many assumptions, you tend to not do it. So what I worked with the product leader in this case for was to put together a business case that was based on the time it takes. So we didn't go to the next step, which is that actually we can save this much time per alert work, per risk that we work through. So we should do this. And it was that business case was partly successful, but we ended up working on both at the same time. But I managed to chisel out a little bit of time to invest in the bet that I strongly felt on, and that the product leader helped me strongly think about. So it's about when the people that are going to be pushing back don't have the context that you have, so don't expect them to have the context you have. So always try and frame it in enough context, but also keep it high level in the terms that they're thinking about. So again, it's think about the audience on your business case. Don't think that everybody on your team has the same. So that was the way I pushed back, and I think that's the best example, even though it wasn't me as the product leader, it was me as the product manager.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's brilliant advice, Kai. All right, well, I think we're right at time. I've got a few kind of wrap up slides here, but Kai, thank you very much for your time today. Awesome advice. Love the presentation, love the visuals and the examples as well. And we'll be sure to kind of upload this to YouTube after. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us today, Kai.
Thanks very much, everybody.
And just some kind of closing remarks, folks. So we'll be doing a post-event survey, and so please leave us your feedback on your experience here today and other conversations you'd love to pick up on. I know Kai mentioned another one, especially discovery. You can continue the conversation over in our Slack channel. I just posted that, and we have a number of events coming up. We got heaps, so I won't speak through all of them, but really interesting workshops and webinars just like this one today. And this is all brought to you by Productboard Product Makers Community. And there's a whole other different ways to get involved. You can connect and grow your network through our own product community. You can get access to different M&As and workshops, and also participate in some of our different programs, such as becoming a speaker. You can also join our roundtables. We do lean coffee style conversations where we talk like this about product conversations. And we've also got a book club and a mentorship program as well. So there's heaps of other ways to get involved. With that, I'll leave it with that. And thank you very much, Cei.
Thanks all for your time. Take care.